After a case which has polarised experts and public opinion, what lessons can be learned? Joined by Dr. Trevor Stammers, a university lecturer in medical ethics, and Caroline Farrow, blogger for The Conservative Woman. Hello to you both. Thank you for joining us on Sky News this afternoon. Caroline, to you, first of all, we heard what Dr. Winston said. We've also heard from a Vatican hospital saying that experimental treatment could have helped, but it was too late. Where are you on this?
Well, obviously, I'm not a medical expert, but I think because there was this window of hope for Charlie's parents, and it was very finely balanced as to whether or not trying would do him any harm. So I think the balance ought to have come down in favour of the parents, and he ought to have been given a chance.
Doctor,
I think Caroline's quite right that it was a very complicated case. I think that when it went back to court and there was hope that evidence from America was new and really offered substantive evidence that treatment might be useful, even I then thought, well, maybe, but the fact that that now has turned out to not be substantiated, even though I wouldn't use the word wicked, I think that everyone in this case has probably been well-intentioned. Unfortunately, misinformation, misunderstanding of information has led to the point where this little boy's life has been protracted for months and months now with no progress. So it's been a very sad ending. And I think now at this stage, if they're still wrangling about the best way for this little boy to die, that's really very, very sad, because if his parents can't say goodbye to him at home, I think that's going to compound their grief.
Yes, I'd agree. And I think there are, of course, we all condemn any abuse that has been doled out at Great Ormond Street. And everyone should accept that Great Ormond Street were trying to act in what they believed were to be Charlie's best interest. But there is a big question mark over how this has been handled, because, I know many friends of mine who work in paediatric intensive care, and they've talked about cases of babies and infants being allowed home on a ventilator to pass at home. And it seems to me the impression that Great Ormond Street are giving is that they are being obstructive. Charlie's parents have now abandoned their fight. So if this was all about him dying with dignity, or supposedly dying with dignity, why can't he be allowed home?
Apparently this is a specialised ventilator that Charlie is on. It's not a regular ventilator, whatever that might mean. And as a result, it is bigger than the normal size ventilator that one would anticipate. And that's why it can't go through the front door, which is why they can't get him into the house. It's a challenge, Doctor.
Well, I think, again, this is another instance where when a reasonable explanation is given as to why a move is taken, that, for me, does put it into a different light. And I think it illustrates, again, how every single move, once trust has been lost, becomes a source of suspicion and makes management then very, very difficult. And if that's been explained, then clearly the two legal teams need to get together to see if there is a way to circumvent that, or to enable the parents to understand that it's not being obstructive. It's a factual thing, a logistical thing that's preventing it.
Well, what is, Caroline, about what we've learned from this, and it'd be interesting to hear from you as well on this one, Doctor, about who should have priority. The court will always say that the child's interests are paramount, but you're perhaps thinking that parents should take priority over the doctor's view.
I think that this has shone a spotlight on a difficult issue. So clearly we can all make a case for when the doctors and the courts need to be involved. If the parents are going to do something that's clearly very harmful to the child, then of course there needs to be intervention. But I think in a case like this, where actually it doesn't, even if the cure that was being offered was something like a man waving a magic wand over Charlie, if it wasn't going to cause any harm to him, and in fact there was a reasonable expectation at one point that it would actually work, then the parents ought to have been given the benefit of the doubt, because he's their son and they really have his best interests at heart. And I think actually Great Ormond Street need to think about that. They rely on the goodwill of the public, and they need to think about actually, was it worth really dragging this through so many court cases, and even then this morning releasing another statement which is then increasing hostility hostility against Charlie's parents. I think actually perhaps they should have realised that, you know, there is public feeling is running high, and maybe the dignified thing for them to do would have been to just stand back a bit and say, OK, we're not going to comment.
Increasing hostility, Doctor, or factual breakdown of what the facts are?
Again, I think it's extraordinarily difficult to know, and as much as people who know me will know that in my clinical work there are many cases where I have been very vocal in my feeling that the state has trampled roughshod over parental rights. In this case, I think it is very, very difficult to know, because under the Children's Act, obviously children have rights, and when there is a conflict between the hospital and the parent, then the only thing I think that the hospital could do was to take it to court for an adjudication to be made between the two. And sadly, this has been a very, very contorted one, and extremely painful on both sides. But I don't think the hospital really had much of an option on that.
Well, you know, back in December, they were wanting to take Charlie for this treatment. It would not have cost them any money to allow the parents to do so. It wouldn't actually have harmed Charlie. I mean, interestingly,
we don't know that, though.
Well, the argument that
we don't
was being
know
used,
how much it would have cost, because he would have had to have been transported with this unit that he needs around him in order to survive. And we don't know about the treatment. We know that the doctor who had said that he could potentially save his life has got a financial interest in that treatment.
But I don't actually think that's problematic, because, you know, everybody, doctors in this country and pharma in this country have a financial interest. And of course, had the treatment worked, then of course whoever was developing it needs to be compensated for that adequately. So I don't actually think necessarily having a financial interest is as problematic. And I think perhaps the doctor has been unfairly vilified in that, you know, he is an expert in mitochondrial diseases. You know, he appeared to believe that there was some hope.
But he hadn't seen Charlie's notes, and I cannot understand why, if he was that concerned and that sure that he really did have something to offer, that he didn't come over earlier. That is very, very strange, because I gather that he was invited. So, you know, there are things that we can't fathom and are a subject of debate, because we purely don't know.
No, but I think what it boils down to is what was being argued in court was Charlie's quality of life was very poor because he was on a ventilator, and that was what was causing him suffering. But actually there was no, this was all assumed, there was no evidence. And in fact, if Charlie had been allowed to be transported, there's no evidence to show that although the treatment may not have worked, neither was there evidence to show that it was going to cause him significant damage or harm him. And then I think the parents, Connie and Chris, they would have had the closure, even if it hadn't worked, they would have had the closure to say, OK, we really tried everything. And we've seen from yesterday, they weren't after keeping him alive indefinitely on a ventilator. They really genuinely wanted to do something that they thought was going to make him better and was going to improve him. And I think, you know, everybody's hearts are breaking for them tonight.
Absolutely.
I do agree that good closure is essential, and if this battle too wrangles on, that's not going to bode well for the parents coping with complicated grief. That's not good.
Yeah, it's not the natural order of things, is it, for your child to die before you?
Absolutely not.
Good to talk to both of you. Thank you very much indeed for your expertise. Thank you. Of course, we'll be covering that in more detail throughout the rest of the afternoon for you here on Sky News. Court has adjourned for a short time to see if both sides can agree what will be best for Charlie and where he will be finally allowed to die. Parents want to take him home. The hospitals say that the ventilator that he needs cannot get through the front door, and other options will have to be investigated. The judge has said, decide between the two of you, otherwise I will decide. Now, an electric version of the Mini is to be built at BMW's plant in Oxford. The German car maker says that the new model will go into production in 2019 at its Cowley factory. Let's speak to our business presenter.